Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to Interchange, and thank you so very much for joining us. Some interesting stuff to talk about again today. Why do you think it takes a dozen law enforcement officers to surround and search the home of someone in the Scott Walker administration? And why isn't anybody talking? We'll discuss a report out this week by a conservative organization that blasts the University of Wisconsin-Madison for allegedly making it easier for blacks and Hispanics to be admitted compared to whites and Asians. And we'll talk about what changes might lie ahead for the US Postal Service as fewer and fewer people even use snail mail. All right, let me introduce everyone. We have longtime business reporter for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, now retired, Avi Lank. Kevin Fischer, longtime broadcaster, political analyst, oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Talk Radio. Denise Callaway is the coordinator of business and community partnerships for the Milwaukee Public School System. And education consultant and local job creation expert Gerard Randall. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, the first thing we're going to talk about is Cynthia Archer, a longtime aide to Scott Walker, in the news big time this week. Cops and FBI surround her home in Madison, search the house and yard, wear plastic gloves, remove materials, and then won't say a word about why they are there. She maintains she has done nothing wrong, says she doesn't need legal representation, says she's the victim of character assassination. Some reports say this might be tied to a year-old John Doe investigation into county workers who may have done some campaign work while on the county payroll. This seems like a lot of time and a lot of manpower to devote to something unless, Kevin, it was pretty major.
Well, then, if so, tell us what's going on.
Yeah.
Not a single person, as you said in your opening, is talking. None of the law enforcement people are talking. And I'm very pro law enforcement, as you know, from watching this program. But I think there comes a time when you cross the line, and now is it a witch hunt? Is it harassment? This John Doe investigation has been going on for a year. No Milwaukee County employees have been found guilty of anything. What strikes me is that they went into her home, and they ransacked her home and came out with a box. And are you suggesting that she did something illegal on her computer in her own house? If she did something that questionable on her work computer at the state capitol, that's one thing. Then there's the media coverage. For the longest time, the Journal policy has been we will not name anyone who's under investigation unless they've been charged. They've plastered this woman's name all over the paper. They practically gave her address out. And after all of this, a dozen law enforcement, numerous FBI people, what are they going after her for? They went after Darlene Wink, who worked for the then County Executive Walker, and they found her guilty of writing anonymous comments on a blog.
On county time.
But you know, is that felonious, for heaven's sakes?
Well, actually,
so tell us, if she did something wrong, charge her, tell us. If not, then where does this poor woman go to get her reputation back?
You do wonder, maybe it's not political at all.
Well, I think there are a couple of things. We need to take a little bit of the hyperbole away on this, and let's think about a couple of factual things. A John Doe investigation, by the nature of a John Doe investigation, is a secret investigation. So the police, the FBI, the district attorney's office are not going to talk about a John Doe investigation until they are willing to charge. We don't know what they were doing there, but I think it's fair to say that the FBI doesn't usually show up at your door because it's selling Girl Scout cookies. There are some serious issues there where they have obtained a search warrant to have the ability to come in and search for specific items in that home that they believe are related to something that took place that's improper.
Like what?
I mean,
what?
and I think the John Doe investigation will tell us what that is. I think, to be fair to Ms. Archer, you don't want information leaking out about what may or may not have happened from the district attorney's office. The district attorney needs to be, as he has been. These are very serious charges and allegations that influence and can ruin people's lives. He has been methodical about going through a process of investigating this and investigating it very carefully. The other thing that we need to realize, if we think about past John Doe investigations, is that sometimes, and I'm not suggesting that's what's happened in this case, but it perhaps is something else that's going on there. During the process of an investigation, they find other things, and we don't know whether or not that's happened.
I think there might be an indication that they have, however, because I talked to a couple of friends of mine who are in law enforcement, and they can't remember a time that the FBI was involved in a John Doe investigation. So you wonder if there's maybe something else going on that we don't know about. None of us know anything. I found a couple of things sort of interesting. Not only did they take boxes out of her house, but at least according to media reports, they took
one box out.
They took a computer hard drive she had apparently sold to a neighbor, which I don't buy computer hard drives from my neighbors. I'm not totally sure what that's about. The other thing I find interesting is we're still paying her salary. She hasn't been charged with anything. I understand that.
Innocent till proven guilty.
But somehow this is a woman who was on sick leave from one job who manages to land another job at the same time, which is a nice trick. You know,
it doesn't warrant the FBI being at your house for 3 hours.
But I'm not saying that's why the FBI was at her house. But I do think that the fact that the FBI was involved in this is a salient point in all of us from the outside trying to see what's going on, because the FBI does not generally get involved in John Doe investigations.
You can somewhat understand the criticism by Walker supporters who say because of the divisive nature of politics right now, they're just continuing to go after Walker. They want to bring Walker down and tie him into this. But we don't know. We don't know.
I'm not laughing. I'm proud of
you're laughing.
This makes me a skeptic, to be perfectly honest. I'd be one of those that, given it's been a year-long inquiry, nothing has turned up that has led to any kind of indictment. Nothing has turned up that's led to anything other than some additional investigations and now something at the federal level. We don't know what that is. But you do have several reputations that are hanging in the balance as a result because of the speculation as to what it might be. And you put a person on the defense having to come up with money, and she said she's not going to hire a lawyer. Cindy Archer has said that. She's not going to retain an attorney.
And Walker said today, I know nothing other than what I've read in the paper.
And he hasn't been implicated so far. But, you know, the stink starts to get spread all over the place, and people manage to get stunk up even when they don't feel that they've got any investment in this. I think what ultimately has to happen is if the federal government has something that has led to the FBI investigating, they're going to have to come up with some pretty quick charges or level with folks and say what it is that they have been going after.
Yeah.
And likewise with local law enforcement, because they've been responsible for the year-long investigation of the aides in the Walker office.
I don't think that the FBI or the district attorney's office has to come up with something in a hurry, because there are stories in the newspaper that report the fact that they're investigating this. They need to do what they've been doing and be diligent about that. And let's kind of clarify one thing. Where there hasn't been a charge or an arrest from anyone associated with the Walker administration on this, there has been an arrest and there has been a conviction involving this John Doe investigation that's been going on.
A former state worker, not a Milwaukee County worker who worked for Walker.
There was a campaign donor who was convicted, who was charged, and
he was a state worker.
But let's make it really clear. No, he wasn't.
He was the president of a railroad.
Right.
He was not. But let's make it really clear that there has been something that's come out of this investigation early on. The district attorney and the FBI are continuing to investigate. I mean, if I'm sitting in her shoes, I don't want somebody to come up with something and say something in a hurry. I want them to be diligent about this investigation. So if, in fact, as she said, she's done nothing wrong, she isn't charged with anything.
Right. She doesn't want to become the next Georgia Thompson.
She should feel comfortable about the Journal-Sentinel 2 days in a row with 24 paragraphs that are speculative in nature at the very best.
And I've seen, in fact, too many reputations that have been sullied as a result of speculation, particularly by the media. This whole thing, what she has done, I think, has taken the right steps in saying that she's innocent. She can't go beyond that. She probably doesn't even know what they're after themselves. The computer that she sold to the neighbor that had the hard drive taken from it, that only leads to the additional speculation that what is going on that's untoward here that nobody can answer until the FBI comes out and makes some kind of
There are people
definitive
that just
statement.
want to
won't
see
do
Scott
that.
Walker nailed and are actually hoping that something terrible happens to this woman.
All right, next
They'll
topic,
announce
next
it when
topic.
they finish their investigation.
Some people have been complaining for many years that UW-Madison gives minorities a break in the admission process. This week, a conservative organization out of Virginia caused a big ruckus in Madison when it claimed in a news conference that a review of records shows that Madison does in fact admit a higher percentage of Black and Hispanic applicants compared to white and Asian applicants, and admits them even though they aren't as academically qualified. Well, the university denies this, but also proudly claims that they do legally consider race as one of the very many factors they use in the admission process, because they say it leads to a more diverse student body, which they claim is a good thing. But, Gerard, I'm sure you took part in many of these discussions when you were on the Board of Regents. Is it, in fact, reverse discrimination? If I have a son or daughter who's white and she has these grades and this SAT score, and a Black student has grades that are not as good and SAT scores that are not as high, is there any reason the Black student should get in before the white student? Any reason?
Let's look at the numbers. You have about 23,000 white students, just over 23,000 white students at Madison that enrolled this fall, and you have about 800 Black students, about 821. In 2001, when I was in the middle of my term on the Regents, we had about 600, just over 600 Black students and about 25,000 white students that attended Madison. So the number has increased only slightly, and that represents, those Black students represent just under 3% of the overall undergraduate student population at Madison. The graduate student population is just under 2% overall, Black students making up just under 2%. Asian students, and particularly those Asian students that they would like to see their numbers increased, represent about 2% of the undergraduate population at Madison, and slightly over 3%, I believe, of the graduate student population. So people, I think, are looking at numbers that, if they were to reflect even the population in the state of Wisconsin that make up the Black population, which is somewhere around 6%, we don't even come close to representing those numbers in the flagship land-grant university in this state. We have the largest number of students who come out of the public schools in Milwaukee that don't even select Madison as their first choice. Many of them, in fact, if they choose a land-grant institution, will go up to Minnesota. We do a very poor job of recruiting and retaining those students when they do go to Madison. We do a very poor job of preparing all of our students. For those who say that Black students in particular come in academically unprepared, let's look at the fact that most students who go into college these days are underprepared in math, they're poor readers, they don't write very well as compared to their peers 20 years ago. So to cast Black students or other students of color in a bad light and say that they can't compete academically, or that they're overrepresented in terms of their numbers in our flagship campus, and they can't compete when they get there, I think is just sad that has gotten out there into the ether as fact when it's not.
Denise, should the rules be any different for anybody based on the color of their skin?
They're not. They shouldn't be, and they're not at UW-Madison. Race is one of the factors that they consider. It's not the factor, it's one of the factors. And I think,
And the court has said that is legal.
Well, not only is it's legal, I mean, the UW
laudable.
system has done an incredible job of taking a look at, when it comes to student admission, expanding the way it looks at diversity, which is why they have multiple factors they take a look at. They take a look at whether or not students are from urban or rural or suburban settings. What kind of activities have they been involved in? What's their socioeconomic status? They look at a number of factors when making a decision about students. Race is one factor, grades are one factor, ACT is another. It's one of several factors that they look at. But when you look at the numbers that Gerard was talking about, do we really think that there are people in Madison, students at UW, who are saying, yeah, there are too many Black and brown students here? People aren't saying that because it's not true. There are not a lot of Black and brown students at UW. The worst disservice that this thinly veiled material that someone wants to pass off as research does is for those students who have rightfully earned the ability to attend the University of Wisconsin-Madison, to receive an outstanding education. It once again, by some cockeyed and cockamamie research that's done, paints them in a position that they do not belong there when in fact they absolutely do.
But Kevin, the criticism that some people have is that the color of the skin shouldn't be considered at all.
At all.
These are the requirements to get in. You either meet them or you don't.
And with all due respect, Gerard and Denise, and probably Avi too, the issue is not that there's only 3% black or 4% Hispanic or X number of black and Hispanic students. The issue is the admissions policy, which the UW authorities knew something was wrong, and they tried to keep this information from becoming public. There was a group, the Center for Equal Opportunity, that did the study, that tried to get the information, and it had to go through a legal battle that went all the way to the state Supreme Court. And then after that ruling, they had to do the Freedom of Information Act, because the UW didn't want it to be public that blacks and Hispanics have a 500 times better chance of being admitted than similar white or Asian students, that black and Hispanic students that score 100 to 150 points lower on the SAT tests have a better chance of getting in than applicable white and Asian students. And then what is the reaction from the university? Instead of trying to address the findings, they make inflammatory statements that rile up the student groups, who then charged and disrupted the press conference announcing these findings. They were knocking down hotel employees where the press conference was taking place. It's very true.
Not true. My son was there. Not true.
Even one of the top officials at the hotel said that was going on.
Not true.
If these things were reversed, we'd have people screaming bloody murder that this is unfair. I don't see how anyone can say that X student has a 500 times better chance of getting in than Y student when they're equal. Opportunity should be equal, but it should also be colorblind.
But you know, no two people are equal, and there are going to be subjective judgments made here.
Apparently.
And you know what? It's a good thing to try and have a more diverse student body at UW or at any school.
Not if the process is unfair.
And it's not.
Well, but you know what?
It's not.
Trying to help one at the expense of another is not fair.
That's how life works. You help one at the expense of another, but that's not the point here.
And that's not what's happening
And that's not what's happening. It's one criteria of many. You talk to parents in the North Shore of Milwaukee who have students who are much more qualified than some of the students, at least on these numerical criteria, than some of the students from rural Wisconsin, and more of the students from rural Wisconsin are admitted, and that's probably a good thing. You know, if you want to have a broader number of certainly of black students and probably Hispanic too, applying to UW and successfully getting in, so that perhaps the percentage of the ones that get in would lower.
So what does that tell?
Excuse me.
Just a second, Kevin. What does that tell a kid in high school who, you know,
Kevin, would you let me finish my thought?
Does great on his grades and then, well, you're white. Sorry.
That's actually not what happens. You have
let Lavi finish his thought.
Let him finish.
What I was going to say, Denise, was the way to improve the number of blacks getting into Madison, to have a bigger pool of blacks, is to improve MPS. And also to find more money, scholarship money, so that a good MPS student can consider Madison just equally with UW-Milwaukee, for example, on an economic basis. And that's one way to handle this.
That's one way to handle it. And the reason that the UW system took this to the Supreme Court was not that it was afraid of the information that was going to come out. It was a question about what student records it felt that it could legally release. That was the reason that went to the Supreme Court.
They did not want people to know
Kevin,
how their admissions process is totally unfair and would make Martin Luther King roll over in his grave.
You know what? That's just one of the most ridiculous things I think I've ever heard him say.
Right.
And that's on a long list of ridiculous.
Go listen to his I Have a Dream speech another time.
There's a lot of talk these days that the US Postal Service is going to have to dramatically downsize and reinvent itself because people just aren't using snail mail as much as they used to. They've already removed half the neighborhood mailboxes, but there's speculation They'll have to raise rates again, close post offices, cut out Saturday delivery. It makes you wonder, Denise, if mail delivery is going to go the way of rotary dial telephones and the police call boxes.
Yeah, it's amazing to think in our lifetime how, the U.S. mail, which was, the way everybody got their information, has now become a second class, or maybe a second postage class, deliverer of information. I don't think that the post office will ever go the way of the rotary dial phone, but clearly there are going to be some significant changes in the way that it operates. I do think we will lose delivery one day. I don't know if it's going to be a Saturday. Maybe they're going to do it in the middle of the week, but we're not going to see mail delivered 6 days a week. We are going to see a reduction in the number of post offices that exist. I mean, those are expensive to run. We vacation in a little place in Michigan that's got 800 people in the whole village, and they have their own post office. Well, the reality of it is they love having that post office there, but do they really need it, or could they travel another 10 miles to get to another post office? So both in suburban, city, and rural areas, we're going to see some changes in what's available to us in terms of brick and mortar post office facilities. I think we're going to see a change in the way that mail is delivered. It's not going to be delivered 6 days a week. And I do think that postage rates are going to go up on top of all of that. They have an ungodly mess on their hands, and in no small way due to the fact that, like many other governmental entities, they've got a big pension obligation problem. They're going to have to make significant changes, and we're going to have to get used to it. So maybe the new phrase will be neither rain nor sleet nor snow, but maybe some problems we're having financially will cause us to not be able to make all of our rounds.
Will they be able to steal any business if they revamp from UPS and FedEx and get that back?
No.
And
the reason they won't be able to get it back is because, as Denise mentioned, the pension costs, their legacy costs. The post office was one of those places where if you wanted to have a good middle class paying job, you went to work, and especially if you were from a background like mine. African Americans look to the railroads, to the post office, or some other kind of government agency to help support them in jobs where they might not have had an opportunity to access those jobs otherwise. And so when you look at the vast numbers of people that used to work for the post office that are now retired, when it wasn't as highly mechanized as it became in the 70s and the 80s, and then when people latched on to the internet and competition from UPS and FedEx and others came into play, you saw the post office have to grapple with the cost of how do they compete. They have to begin to downsize and mechanize more, and in the process of doing that, all those workers that had incentives to retire early left them with costs that they're still straddled with. And they left them with pension costs that they can't move to anyone else other than to the federal government, which is obligated to take those costs on. So unless they can figure out some kind of way to discharge those costs, they're not going to be competitive in this current environment or in environments in the future that are going to be more focused on mechanization or more focused on the transference of electronic data. You look at people's telephones today, and it carries more mail than perhaps what the typical person was sending out in mail in an average year. That's the wave of the future that the post office will never be able to compete with.
What we have, a lot of this is an attempt by the management of the post office to bust unions, the same way that Scott Walker did here, because the unions are the people who negotiated these benefits for their employees. It's an easier solution to do that than it would be to actually sit down with the unions and try and work things out so that some of these costs might be mitigated a little bit. The post office has the same kind of problem that newspapers had, which is to say that technology has gone by them and they were established organizations. Unfortunately, I think for some really ideological conservatives in this country, you can't outlaw the post office, right? It's right there in Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. It's an enumerated power of the Congress to establish
Post office's problems are not political. They created their own problems because they can't compete with UPS, FedEx, or the internet.
But they might if they tried to cooperate better with their own workers.
If you tuned into the CNN Tea Party debate last Monday night, you saw a stage full of GOP hopefuls and a crowd that knew exactly what it wanted to hear from them. Rick Horowitz has been seeing a lot of that lately. Rick.
We're watching you. We're watching what you do. We're watching what you say. We're watching who you work with and who you talk to. We're the purity police, the Republican purity police. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter who you've been. You can be a senior member of the Republican Congressional Caucus. You can be a popular former Republican governor looking to make a comeback. We don't care. The P in GOP now stands for purity. If you're with us most of the time on most of the issues, not good enough. If your positions way back then don't square up with the approved party positions of right this minute, not good enough. Did you ever reach across the aisle? Did you ever sign on to a compromise? Did you ever grow the size of the government? Did you ever approve a tax increase? You're toast. We have no tolerance for deviation. Deviation is for deviants. You will agree with party doctrine, not partially or half-heartedly, but totally and fervently, with every fiber of your body and your soul. You will agree with the current Republican philosophy and Republican history, with Republican science and Republican math. If you don't, if ever you didn't, we are coming for you. We've even invented a new verb for you. We will primary you. That's right, the P in GOP now stands for primary. We will take you down. This is not your grandfather's Republican Party. This is not even your father's Republican Party. This is the new, sterilized and energized, purified and sanctified Republican Party. If you harbor doubts, if you favor more moderate approaches, be gone. There is no room for you here. We're the purity police, and we're watching you. The P in GOP now stands for perfection.
Thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.